Okay, I think we should be live. Everybody, welcome. This is the June 13th weekly Strength Club shitposting stream. I have my boy Chase Lindley here. How's it going, Chase?
Doing well, Alex. How are you?
Doing pretty good. This is going to be an interesting one. We're going to be talking about the novice linear progression, something I feel like we probably should have talked about a little bit earlier on, but it's basically going to be like why we're doing the thing, what the structure of the thing is, and then how we move past it. I would say the biggest chunk of it is going to be spent on like what advanced novice is, kind of the introduction to early intermediate programming, and kind of the why behind that. But to start, I think we'll just go through, we'll do some light plugs. We have some Instagram accounts here, all of which are very important. I think the second one is the most important. Our boy Mick, he started a musical Instagram account called micksolo.man. You can see him playing some trumpet and getting his groove on. It's awesome. I would highly recommend following that. Chase, what's going on with your Instagram?
The same shit. I just post. It's basically a virtual training log, but no, micksolo.man. That's where it's at, man. You'll see him just blaring on the trumpet and just ripping fools apart.
Yeah, I know. He's having a good time. I really enjoyed it. But for you, so what's going on with your training, man? You have the meet coming up?
I do. So I recently hit a snatch PR, which was really nice because I was pretty struggling with kind of like the 130 kilo area. And the problem with me is this, I've talked to other coaches about this, how just like how on the power clean, if you're kind of messing up with the rack or how you need to practice front squats to improve your power clean, you need to do overhead squats with your snatch. And I started plugging those in, and man, it has totally helped my positioning and just getting more stable out of the bottom. So what I usually have a problem with is that as I snatch and I get ready to lock out my elbows, the thing will kind of just jump around, and I always run out and catch it. With this, I feel a little bit more stable. And
so have you been doing snatch balances, or have you been doing it straight out
overhead squats?
Okay. Have you tried the snatch balance? Are you a big fan of those or no?
I've never tried those. I could probably throw those in, but if the overhead squats are working, I'd rather just stick with those.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want anything crashing down. Ooh, yeah. It's always interesting to see, like the lifters who have been adapted for like 15 years of snatch balances, just dropping 150 kilos right on the traps. And you're like, all right, man, that's cool.
Oh, I did it the other day. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I thought I was going to like sever like the C7.
Yeah, spines are pretty cool. Cool. But yeah, so Chase, you can check in on his meet preparation at his Instagram. I do not have an Instagram. I try to keep everything off of social media the best I can. I'm going to start getting back onto the Starting Strength Reddit. That place seems to have gone to hell. But now that I have a little bit more time on my hands, things have settled down. We're getting back to the Starting Strength Reddit. I'll be cleaning up things there. You find my website. So Chase does online coaching. I do online coaching as well. So if you feel like any of us could offer you some guidance, reach out to one of us. We'd be more than happy to help you out. But so the things we're going to be talking about here, first, these are the topics for afterwards. We'll kind of have to define what the starting strength linear progression is, why the hell we're doing it in the first place. And for anybody watching, if you have any questions, programming, lifting related, feel free to shoot those out there. But the first thing we're going to go through is what is the starting strength LP, if you kind of sum that up for us, Jace. Big question.
So the LP, in my own words, is the step-by-step adding weight to the bar of us getting stronger, right? So it is taking your lift wherever you start out day one and gradually increasing the stress, not to a point where you can't handle, but just systematically until you've hit your goal, right? That's basically what training is just a systematic approach to, achieve whatever goal that you're training for.
Yeah. So basically, it's just like we are with the LP. Rip has a really good talk on this. I want to say it's literally I think it's the case for the starting strength model. If you have someone who has an hour of their time to listen to it or 30 minutes of their time on 2 times speed, I'd recommend that one maybe more. It just sounds like a normal person talking if you listen to Rip at 2 times speed at that point. When I listen to him at normal 1 time speed now on a not YouTube video, it sounds weird, honestly.
Really? I guess I'm just used to it. So.
I think before the seminar, I always watched so many of the videos at 2 times speed. I heard him in real life, and I was like, this is 4 times slower than I expected it to be. But you get the information. You get it for sure. But yeah, so look up the case for the starting strength model. Love that video. But essentially what we're doing is we have triage exercise selection for these are the things that you could be doing, which are the best use of your time. We are going to get you as good at those things as we possibly can until the diminishing returns start to kick in. Right. So we're doing the minimum amount of work that you need to do, and you're just going to improve and iterate up on that with weight over weight over weight each specific time. And a pretty obvious question is, well, why don't we increase reps every time, or why don't we increase set targets every time, or something like that, or even weekly? But the big thing for that is, kind of why we're doing it in the first place. So point number 2 in here is establishing the win conditions of we're just trying to get stronger. That's really it, even with someone like a marathon runner who's like, oh, I'm taking, 40,000 some steps or 80,000 odd steps through the course of my marathon. They're not going 1 step, then 2 steps, then 3 steps, then 4 step each time they're training. They're modulating intensity as well as their volume loads. With people who are just trying to get stronger, we're doing that by just putting 5 more pounds on the bar, and it's going to be a little bit different for everybody, but that's the general gist of it. Establish what you need to do, establish what your win condition is, and then just keep doing it until it stops working. And then that can last 1 month for some people, that can last 5 months for other people. Then the next thing actually, Chase, before we move on for that one, for the win condition, for most people who are coming into your gym, do a starting strength gym, they're familiar with the brand. They don't have like very specific goals. They don't have a goal like, oh, I want to be a power lifter, or, oh, I want to be an Olympic weightlifter. What do you think for them is their win condition? Like, what are they trying to get out of the process?
They're basically just trying to get as strong as they possibly can, which makes my job a little bit easier, right? So now I don't have to, I don't have a deadline that I need to work around, right? Mm-hmm. It's just, okay, well, now I can just make small gradual changes as need be. And then, you have the occasional life event that gets in the way, but that's a simple, easy fix. And that person, again, they're not fretting over anything. They're not having even more stress in their life with the added of, oh, I don't know if I'm in a proper prep with how, I'm going to be in this meet for my marathon, or I don't think I'm strong enough for, again, the weightlifting meet that I'm going to do 3 months down the line. It's a lot easier, right? You don't have to deal with the psychology, I think, of an athlete. Whereas if you just get someone who's just a ranked novice, they come in and they're like, hey, this is Danny. I'm working out. But, we're not necessarily working out. We're training to get stronger.
Yeah, that's really it. It's just like training to get stronger. It's the preface of the book. It's why strength. It's kind of what starting strength is built itself around. In so much of exercise now, there's just kind of like topical powerlifting is a reason to train, whereas in reality, I think for most people, it's not really just powerlifting. It's not a competition. It's just trying to be generally more useful. We'll cover advanced novice in short. That kind of matches with SKES question. So he says, Delgadillo talked about making small changes as you need them to keep the NLP going as long as possible. It seems like there is no real black or white line between novice and intermediate status in that case. It just evolves lift by lift. How would you define the difference? The difference between novice and intermediate training, as they like to define it in PPST or practical programming for strength training, is when the lifter is starting to progress on like a week to week lengths, or basically microcycle, as opposed to session to session. I like that in terms of, if you think about it from modern exercise science terms, the typical microcycle length, or which you can kind of match that up to starting strength's SRA cycle, expands from like 48 hours to like the series of a week. And then, when you're dealing with a more advanced lifter, that microcycle can really be like 2 weeks. Sometimes it's 9 days to 12 days, depending on what the person is. And microcycle length, it's a function of logistics because we're all human beings who have lives as well. So you kind of have to interface it with that. So really, I think it's more just like novice, not novice. Intermediate to advanced is a really hard line. And of course, it is a little bit arbitrary there, but it's definitely lift to lift. What do you think, Chase?
Yeah, well, what we see a lot of the time is like people who are trying to do this on their own as they get out of the novice phase is that they instantly determine themselves with an intermediate, or they're looking for some category to put themselves under. Training is a step-by-step process of getting stronger, right? So a step-by-step isn't a large leap into, you being stronger. It's the blending of, going from an advanced novice to an intermediate and an intermediate to advanced. It should almost surprise the client or you training in the sense that you're not taking this huge jump where, the day after this huge stress event or your workout, you're getting totally sore to where you can't move. At that point, you're not training. You're just kind of fucking up at that point.
Yeah, it kind of to match with that. Like I had one of my clients, I was talking to them today, and then they asked me if they were an intermediate lifter. They have been doing intermediate programming for literally months. Yeah, for months. And it's like, yeah, like what do you think you've been doing this whole time? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes, you're doing like 20 sets of squats a week. It's like you're doing a bunch of shit.
And it's so weird because people they want to be in a category. It's like, who cares, man? You just need to add weight to the bar any way possible and just get strong.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so advanced novice, that's the intermediate stuff. I do want to cover modifications from prior exercise. Like, what if you do come in and you have a bench bro who's been benching 3 times a week for 2 years, but he's never overhead pressed in his life? Do you make modifications at the start of the LP just as much as you have someone who's like, oh, I have a shoulder tweak and I never bench, but I do overhead pressing 3 times a week. Modifications, prior exercise, if there are any, and then when to end an LP. But we'll head over to this next slide. I want to talk about length of the LP to start. So typically it's going to last between 1 to 4 months. There are people who can be on either side of this, like if you have a 16-year-old kid, his LP could last through puberty. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He's training 2 times a week because that's what he can fit in with his school schedule. And he just adds weight to everything every single time he does it. Right. Whereas, I would say in reality, if you kind of take someone from a normal standpoint, it's going to last between 1 to 4 months. But kind of on the 1 to 2 month side, it can really surprise people. There are a lot of people who will, depending on their history, only get like a month and a half into the LP and will stop working. And they'll be like, oh, but I am eating, I am sleeping. This should last 4 months. This should last 5 months. What am I doing wrong? But there's kind of a lot. It's like this spectrum of anabolic sensitivity of, essentially what your response to training is going to be. And it's going to be different for everybody. So I kind of threw up some examples here. So it's just like, you can have a 60-year-old female who's coming in, who's like 115 pounds. She doesn't have a lot of lean body mass, but she's been active her whole life, That LP could last a month and a half, maybe. Especially with the upper body movements, with the lower body movements, she may be really efficient at deadlifting, like the second or third time she's deadlift ever, and she may run out the deadlift LP really, really quickly. And then you can also have a 45-year-old guy who seems relatively healthy, but he's just never done any activity, prior to this. So it's just like you're dealing with a bunch of stuff where he's running into issues with his shoulders and his hips and his knees and all that stuff that you would think of with a 60-year-old, or a 70-year-old that he has to deal with because he's been sitting on his ass for the past 25 years. Mm-hmm. Or you could be dealing with someone who is relatively active, but they have kind of an abnormal circumstance, which pulls the length of the LP down, Like one big thing that I'll run into with athletes is people who's like, oh, I'm coming out of an ACL surgery, or I'm coming out of a labral tear surgery, So it's just like, we can't even deadlift appropriately. We can kind of go up to this rough little intensity range, but then we'll have to pull it back for medical circumstances. A lot of these things are reasons why the LPs end really quickly. Do you think I missed anything there, Chase?
No, that's about right. With kind of touching on the people with injuries and stuff, your job is mostly rehab at that point, right? You can't really stress them as efficiently or as much as you want to on a novice linear progression, because we got to get the guy or female stronger, or I'm sorry, better before we can get them stronger.
Yeah, they're part and parcel together, and it's kind of like this thing where if someone's pulling, like 500 pounds before like a labral tear, their rehab process may be like, okay, you can fold 300 in your hands now, and it doesn't feel like your shoulder is going to fall off anymore, Whereas for like a 60-year-old, female who weighs 105 pounds, that may be like, okay, we are now doing a full range of motion squat as opposed to a partial range of motion squat, So like the wind conditions there are all very different. That definitely goes back to what we were talking about before. Chase, for people who it lasts that 3 to 5 month range for, who are those people?
Typically young, athletic people. Like what I've seen is, for myself, is that I've ran several novice linear progressions myself, and that's because I started at 12 and I've grown.
12.
Essentially, it doesn't matter, what sex it is. It's the person is growing, right? So their segments are changing. They're allowed to put on more muscle mass, right? And their hormones are just out through the roof. So their ability to recover is extremely well. It's very proficient, and you can just dump a shit ton of weight on them, and they can handle it. Mm-hmm. And you also made a good point on this one, the 35-year-old female who's active. Yeah, I've seen this a lot with females that age, is something with them hitting their peak around that time. Usually males hit their peak a little bit earlier, but females hit them a little bit later. And it usually starts really blossoming at that point where you can just dump a bunch of weight on them.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, it really lines up. People who are in this kind of golden 3 to 5 month spot, it's really going to be people who have like the physical, mental, and like time resources to do it. Like if you're a professional adult and you've kind of are in your groove, at this point, like that's great. If you have the time to commit to training for the 6 months that you can do it, this is a good time for you. If you're just sitting around in college and you always have a 3 hour, 4 hours a day, this is a great time to do it.
Yeah.
Or if you're 12 and you're just like, hey, I guess middle school's coming up.
Yeah, like
I have to plan for that.
My job was literally go to school, lift, and eat. Like it's super. It's just it built around handling stress inside the gym, not stress outside the gym. Whereas like the 1 to 2 month people, they're either dealing with just the lack of recovery of age or a stressful job, other variables that we have to consider in the length of the novice linear progression.
Yeah, it's like I have 2 clients who are in law school right now. It's just like they do an LP during their summer and they do intermediate programming basically during their semester, and then during finals they don't do anything because they're working 90 hours a week.
Yeah.
So it's just like the level of advancement of programming. It's usually dependent on what you're actually doing at the time. But yeah, so it's kind of this big thing, depending on who you are and what you're doing. Question from Theodore. He said, can I add bicep curls to the NLP? Is cycling with the mates after training days bad? And does 19 count in the young 3 to 5 month range? Theodore, if you're willing to gain weight, you can probably just like have brain dead simple programming for like 8 months, honestly. Like if you're going from like, if you weigh 65 kilos now and you end up at 90 kilos, and you do that in a steady manner, you don't just add 10 kilos to your body weight in the first month, you'll be able to sustain increases on all of your lifts for a super long time. What do you think about curls and cycling, Chase?
The curls, man, if you do the novice linear progression effectively and actually do everything you can to maximize your recovery, your biceps are going to get bigger, right? It just from even squatting heavy and pressing heavy, your biceps will grow. So the added stress to it, I would rather you see you just dive deep into the main lifts and get those done, and then maybe do some bicep curls. But at the start, it's really not going to affect you. And then the cycling, just depends on how long you're going to be cycling. If it's 5 kilometers, if it's 10 kilometers, maybe a little bit. That's
cycling
kind of
5 kilometers, right? 2.5 minutes on the bike. Yeah. That's every day, man.
But you got to, at the start, it's gonna work, right? Because again, the stress level that you're doing with the weights on the bar, it's not that heavy, right? It's kind of like the honeymoon phase that we tell people is that at the start, the first 3 weeks that you're doing a novice linear progression, you can do all this crazy shit because your ability to handle stress is basically so low to where the stress level that you're getting is also low to where you can adapt to it very accurately. Now, as you get kind of into the novice progression that is later, you're going to see that your recovery resources are totally drawn towards the weight on the bar and progressing in the gym, and the cycling may affect that.
Yeah, like if you're 1 month into the LP, it doesn't really matter. Nothing you're doing is stressful enough that you can actually create a big enough fatigue hole for the next session. Especially if it's workout 3. Like if it's workout 3 and then you cycle literally 100 kilometers, you will be fine by Monday, right? You don't have a lot of muscle mass that's going to get fatigued really at all, and you're not strong enough to really push that 100 kilometers super hard anyways. You can kind of just attend it or go at a really slow pace. Doesn't really even matter. But if you're 3 months into the LP, I'd have to bet your interests are going to change a good bit too. You know what I mean? I see that a lot with people. Their concern in the beginning will be, oh, what about all the other stuff I want to be doing? They'll be like, oh, well, what if I want to do XYZ activities during my LP? And then 3 months into it, they'll be like, yeah, I kind of just want to lift.
Yeah.
They'd be like, I just really want to put another fucking 10 pounds on my squat, all that stuff. I noticed that a lot. But yeah, so basically it's just like by the time you're at the end of the LP, we start making modifications. We have kind of the standard workout of AB. So you're squatting 3 sets of 5, you're doing a pressing or a benching movement 3 sets of 5, you're pulling 1 set of 5, and then the modifications. Chase, do you want to take us through light squat?
Yeah. So what you typically see with the squat is that it's becoming really taxing. So what we first do is do you think it's
do you think it's the most taxing between the deadlift and the squat, if you kind of had to toss those up?
I think it kind of depends on the person. But the majority of what I see, it's it's usually the deadlift that's really taxing.
Okay.
The squats people can grind through, and then once we add the belt, like I see that we kind of draw that
Second
out a little
win.
bit longer.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas like once adding a belt to a deadlift, it kind of helps for a little bit, like maybe
Mhm.
2 or 3 sessions, but it's still pretty grindy, pretty fast.
Okay.
I think it has something to do with maybe just the grip, right? You're taxing your grip to the point where you're not going to be able to hang on to it, and just the deadlifts are just start out really heavy, and it's going to tax the shit out of you.
Yeah, the deadlifts really run ahead.
Yeah, because the majority of the people that come in, like it's what I see is they struggle with depth from the start and just getting the bottom position. So we take the first 2 weeks, kind of getting them into the bottom position, associating where depth is, and then it starts to snowball from there, where we can actually start going heavy with the squat.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, back to light squat. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna do is, let's say Monday, you did your 3 sets of 5, and the last set, man, it was an absolute grinder. Your coach kind of winces in the corner because he's like, oh shit, he almost did not make that, right? Yeah. So you're gonna get a light day come Wednesday. That's just because the accumulating stress that you're getting from the squats is now getting too much to where you can't handle. So this light day is going to help break up the stress during the week, and then come Friday, you'll be fine, right? So let's say you squat 185 on Monday, absolute grinder. Knock it down 80%, somewhere around 135-ish, 145. And then come Friday, we'll just add 5 pounds to Monday. So about 190 or so.
Do you find that Friday is also grindy, or do you think that kind of speeds up a little bit?
Maybe just a little bit, but it's still roughly in the ballpark of being grindy.
Okay. That's interesting. My experience with that has been that on Friday, they will normally feel, I think it's probably definitely a combination of being psychologically refreshed. Because of, Wednesday wasn't super hard for them. But just those extra few days of just kind of like not having such a heavy weight on your spine seems to do wonders for people. Because you're now basically, you're squatting on like the heavy days, you're doing squat, 3-day break, squat, 2-day break,
Mm-hmm.
So that Monday still you're carrying a little bit of fatigue from that Friday, the previous Friday. But that, the next Friday, you seem to be more fresh in my experience. I find a lot of people will have a little more pep in their step. Well, that could just be a selection bias thing, I'm sure. Theodore said, what point do you guys decide to start adding light squat days? Do you do them every week, or is it just that one time when it gets grindy? That second one is a really good question. Do you do them every week, or is it just that one time when it gets grindy? Chase, what do you think?
So if we kind of compare like the chart on practical programming, where you kind of have like all the lines in the graph, right? So here is your graph of your ability to handle stress, right? It's getting high up there. So with this, we are now going to manipulate it to where the time that you're going to get the stress is more drawn out to where you can recover. Once this change is set, it's pretty much set in stone. Like there's really no way of coming back to this unless like, let's say that person wasn't eating that week or just had outside stress from various other things. Then we could probably go back into a full-on novice linear progression. But again, once we get the light squats, in my own experience, it kind of just stays there. And then what I judge that off of is just bar speed, right? So again, you see the person do a set of 5 first, 2 reasonably good, 3 kind of slows down, and then 4 is just like a 3-second concentric on the way up, and you're like, oh fuck, and you kind of corral him on that 5th rep because like he may not stand up with it, but he has to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the do you do them every week thing, you kind of have to tell why the last one was really grindy. Like, did they just have a bad fight with their wife the night beforehand? Did their boss chew them out right before they left work, before you're coming to see them? Like what's going on in their life as to why that's there. So it's kind of goes our Rip's first 3 questions thing. Do you do them every week? I've found that people's recovery resources, mood, all that stuff plays such a big role that sometimes you can do 2 light squat weeks. And if they're like, hey, I'm really on a roll this week, I've kind of figured out some new technique stuff that's working for me, you don't need that light squat, I'll do so many programming modifications on the fly just based off of people's reports, like physical reporting to me.
Yep.
If someone sends me like their updates and it's like 3 paragraphs as opposed to 1, and they're super hyped up for their lifts, you're like, okay, yeah, we're going to give this guy some extra shit to do because, exactly, he's really pepped up. So that's kind of where the personality thing kind of comes in. You have to be able to read your lifter. But as for deciding when to start a light squat day, it's interesting. You can try to get ahead of it stalling. I try to get ahead of it so that it doesn't end up having that person grind terribly much, because you don't want to leave that. You don't want to give them that model in their brain as to being like, this is how fast you should be moving. I try to keep everything super fast for people. So it kind of really depends on your preference and who you're working with. Chase, I'm not sure the percentage of people that you'll see, but it's like sometimes you'll meet someone who it's like on their 3rd session, everything will start being really slow and they'll just be slow forever. Those people, you have to be a little bit more lenient with when you're adding a light squat day, being like, okay, maybe they just squat like this and we don't need to add one. Maybe it's not the end of their LP. And then you'll meet other people who squat, their concentric portion is barely half a second. And then when it gets to like 1.25 seconds, for them, that's an incredibly fatiguing rep.
I came across that several times.
Yeah, it's a bar speed thing that you'll just kind of get a really good eye for over time. Just watch a shit ton of people lift. But basically, whenever the fatigue cost gets too high, that you would be ruining their Friday. That's what I would say. And then the other thing is reducing deadlift frequency, and then it ties into the third one of like introducing a light pull. That could be an RDL, that could technically be a rack pull, depending on what you're doing. Could be volume deadlifts, could be the power clean. When do you start putting those things in there, Chase?
Again, you got to look at the bar speed again with the deadlift, or just your client will come to you and be like, man, I feel like shit from Friday, and you've had the weekend to recover. Did you drink? Did you do anything that's crazy over the weekend? And he said, no, I just had on my ass because I was so tired. And I could still see that he's making, good gains on the squat and that it's moving just fine. I'll go ahead and just, drop him down. And usually what that happens is, kind of like what you were saying with the squat, is that their next pull day, like they can easily crank out a set of 5 and they feel fine.
Yeah, so I think one of the primary criticisms of people saying like, oh, well, if you reduce deadlift frequency during the LP, they're deadlifting less, they'll make less deadlift gains. You kind of have to figure out the carryover between their squat and their deadlift. If there is a real carryover, for most people, it's a huge carryover. But then after that, it's more like how much is the reason that they can't deadlift from fatigue versus not being strong enough to do the pull, So it's just like there are times where like if let's say you're doing 300 on workout A and then the second workout B, if they're doing 305, but whenever, let's say they're warming up with 225, they're like 225 feels incredibly heavy. They're strong enough to lift 225. They're strong enough to lift 300. They didn't magically lose all of that strength in 2 days. They're just still in that fatigue hole, where it's just like if someone's not strong enough to do it, it'll be like, okay, they lifted 300 on workout A. On workout B, they did 305 for 4 reps, and the 5th one, it barely broke off the floor and they stopped. Yeah. That's not strong enough. That's a thing where it's like, okay, we need to start slotting in some more pulls somewhere at different intensity ranges, because it's like, we know that person is recovered enough to do the task, right? They just didn't get the strength adaptations we needed them to get. Whereas with the recovery thing, you'll see this with the squat too. Let's say the person they'll do 300 without any issue on the first workout. On the second workout, they'll come in and all of their warm-ups will feel incredibly heavy. You'll be like pulling 225, 275, and they'll be like, wow, this feels like shit. And you're like, okay, that's the recovery issue.
Yep.
Tidor said, is it okay to introduce power cleans after 2-3 weeks? Squats going up, deadlift just won't. What do you think, Chase?
Yeah, usually I don't have a problem with that, but on the question with the squats going up and the deadlifts just won't, you got to look at other things, right? Is your grip the limiting factor, right? So if you're trying to do a double overhand grip, it's time to probably change it after about 4 weeks, 3 weeks into this thing. You should be hook gripping, mixed gripping, something of that sense. But if your deadlifts still are not going up, you probably just need a programming change. And that's what Alex was mentioning, is that maybe you need to add more frequency. You may need to change up to where you're doing a rack pull if you're not locking out at the top, introducing some haltings or so. But power cleans, definitely, I like to introduce fairly fast, in the sense that it's more so they need to practice it. It's very technique dependent. So the more times that they get introduced and the quicker they do it, especially if they want to proceed and do it in the future, that it always benefits them.
Yeah, like if you really like power cleans and you're hitting some sort of pull off the floor or clean variation 4 times a week, you're not wasting any of those times.
Yeah.
If you're doing it 5 times a week, none of those are a waste. There's always something that you can be doing. How do you kind of triage the light pulls for people? So like, let's say between, let's give it kind of 1 or 2 qualitative statements of these are the times I go to a rack pull. This is the time I go to an RDL. This is the time I go just to light deadlifts. This is the time I go to the power clean.
One is the individual, right? So again, if I have an older person, I'm not going to make them do a power clean unless they're able to.
Yeah.
But if they're fucked up, like let's say they have some bad shoulders or knees, I'm going to probably introduce a rack pull. And I like to kind of more so keep the intensity high with the deadlifts, because a lot of the time I've seen this with people is that once the deadlift starts getting hard, they instantly just cut out all the feet from underneath it. I want it to still be hard, right? I still want the stress to be there. So I'm going to start putting in a rack pull for them. And it also kind of just depends on the person too. If I got a person who's really advanced on the deadlift, like let's say like their deadlift to squat ratio, it's like 150 pounds or 100 pounds more than their squat, I'm probably going to give them a little bit of a light day, just because their deadlift right now is the main
really good point.
factor of, yeah, exactly. It's the main factor of how they're getting stronger right now. So that's going to start stalling here pretty soon, because again, they can't recover from it. And I don't want them hitting a wall, because their squats essentially has to catch up. So I'll kind of give them a break with it. An RDL, light deadlift, power cleans or so.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Just like you have to acclimatize someone to intensity. Like if you feel like someone mentally is going to use that break, if they're like, oh, okay, thank God, doesn't have to be 5 pounds heavier than last time. I'm going to really run with that. They're going to keep looking for reasons to do that over and over and over again. You'll have people who are like, oh, maybe I need to reset to work on technique. Maybe I need more volume. They're just trying to get away from having weight on the bar. The rack pull is a really good one for that. To tell people like, hey, we can just pull the range of motion out. Like the range of motion is also a portion of the stress. Theodore says, isn't the NLP just 3 times a week? It is. We kind of mean like for future intermediate training, like if you should be doing some sort of pull basically all the time, anytime you're in the gym. And then G-Lock says, what if I just don't like deadlifting? What do you think about that, Chase?
G-Lock, come on, man. What I would say is I've always had a hard time, again, with just progressing my own deadlift. What I found has really helped is that doing more of it will actually make you kind of almost indoctrinate you into loving the thing. So you may just have to start adding in a little bit more exercise frequency, and just exercise selection. So like if you feel like you're struggling with deadlifts, let's try some RDLs. Let's try some power cleans or some sense to where greater range of motion, kind of get used to it. And it's a little bit more dynamic and stuff. Yeah.
Try things that look like deadlifting that aren't deadlifting. Yeah. Maybe you'll change your mind a little bit. And so when do you go to the RDL, Chase? As opposed, because we just covered the rack pulls. What's kind of the go-to for you for the RDL?
So that's the person who's just day one, they're repping out like 135 or 185 on their deadlift on their first like intro session with me. Someone who I know is just a natural puller and they can just pull the shit out of the bar. I like to use some RDLs every now and then, in the sense that, I kind of see those people usually have a hard time setting their upper back, or just older people in general. I kind of like using the RDL. And that's why, and the reason why is that a lot of the time people don't really work on the eccentric of a pull, right? And I've seen a lot of the people that I've done really heavy RDLs with just really blossom their pull with heavy RDLs.
Yeah, it's just like you can. So basically, it's like part of the reason the fatigue cost of the deadlift is so high is the absolute load. It's concentric only. We're not controlling the descent or eccentric portion of it. And we're not doing that because we kind of deem the fatigue cost to not be worth the impairment in weight. So it's just like Chase's max deadlift is 700 pounds. Chase's max deadlift with a controlled eccentric. What do you think that is, Chase? With like a 2-count eccentric on the leg.
Maybe 6.
It's definitely less. We'll tell you that much, so it's like when we're kind of, we're weighing those scales, it's like we want more weight right now as an adaptation that we're chasing. We want more maximal force production on the concentric than we do the ability to control the eccentric. The ability to control the eccentric is super important. Plus, it's really great, for building muscle because we have less of a fatigue cost. You can get more volume in with less fatigue. That's a great deal. It's a great deal, especially because it doesn't really impair your primary deadlift that much. So you can keep the force production levels high on your primary parent lift. The RDL, that's one of my go-tos for people anyone who ever complains about tight hamstrings. I'm like, we'll go to the RDL. It's like, you think you have tight hamstrings, you just have untrained hamstrings. Anybody who's not really doing deep squats or like good RDLs or good deadlifts, every one of them says they have tight hamstrings. I really like the RDL for all those reasons. And then what was kind of the third thing that we talked about going to the power clean? That's kind of beaten to death. What's the fourth one? We kind of have either like haltings. That's pretty rare. And then I would also say just more deadlifts. When do you ever go to just more deadlifting? So let's say adding in a 2x5 at 80%, couple triples, things like that.
Again, if that person just is always struggled with the deadlift, I want to add more stress to it. Whether it be with the shorter range of motion where we can kind of tack on that intensity with a rack pull or a halting. But I also see that, usually what people do is they cut out a bunch of the volume by reducing the frequency. So like, let's say they do chins instead of an RDL or some kind of pull. Now the deadlift kind of just sits there and it relies solely on the intensity, but you kind of need a little bit more volume with it to kind of help train it.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions is like people think that the chin slot going into where the deadlift is to drive the deadlift, where it is like it's more the chin is a helpful accessory to the deadlift, but it's really just kind of letting you recover for your next deadlift session, giving you some kind of tertiary lat work, where it's not like if you never deadlift, your chin up will get you to a 400-pound deadlift. That's not how that works. But yeah, so I think for the people who I asked just for more deadlifts, no flavor on it, no RDLs, no haltings, no rack pulls, no power cleans. It's people who just need more confidence and more technical practice. Because it's like the setup for the RDL is different. The setup for the rack pull is different. They're samey, but different. Whereas if I just have someone who's kind of like a technical moron and it's going to be different every single time, it's like, you just need to do more of the deadlifts. You need to have, rather than having 15 reps of opportunities across the week, you need to have 25. You need to have 30 opportunities to get this movement down. And then MJDC, shout out. Highly recommend reading Practical Programming for Strength Training for sure. Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. And then, one thing we have adding a fourth pressing slot on here. This is kind of basically in my brain whenever the LP is like officially over for the upper body movements is whenever I'm like, okay, we're basically adding in a fourth pressing slot. What's your go-to for this one, Chase?
Yeah, that's right. So what I kind of do is Nick Delgadillo wrote a good article about like a condensed Texas method with the upper body stuff. So like one day is you're both pressing and pinching, and then the other 2 days in the week is one's a volume for your press and one's a volume for your bench. My go-to again after that is maybe doing a little bit more exercise selection with especially with the press, adding in pin presses, pin bench, and more so just exercise selection.
Okay, my go-to for this one is if I can con someone to doing it, I'll be like, hey, well, what are you doing Saturday morning? And they'll be like, I don't know nothing. And you're like, okay, well, how about you go hit some pressing and some chin-ups? It'll only take you like 30, 45 minutes, and then it'll get on this thing where we'll go benching workout, 1, benching workout 3, and then you're pressing on workouts 2 and 4, so it's going bench, press, bench. And then right after that, you're sneaking in some pressing and some chin-ups, all that sort of stuff. Basically, like, okay, perfect. Now you're on a 4-day split model where it's going like workout, rest, workout, rest, workout, workout, rest. And then we can start, using that fourth workout to get in that conditioning work that they need to do, to get in that extra pressing work, to get in, that extra, all the extra upper body pulling. That's kind of my go-to for that one. That's the first step to increase total training frequency. And then in part using that is the reason to like get in the gym and do some extra pressing work. How often are you using like the close grip bench and other bench variations? I know you like the pin variations, but how often do you ever do grip variations?
I hardly ever. I especially not on the press. Overhead press, I wouldn't mess with the grip width at all. But occasionally I will use the close grip if someone's shoulder is bothering them. That's just the sake of not putting as much strain on the shoulder joint. But yeah, as far as just progressing a close grip bench, no, I don't mess with it.
You gotta try it, man. I love it. I love the close grip bench, and then I think for the press, I love the jerk grip strict press. I think
Really
has been a big thing for me. Yeah. Just because it's like people are so. Whenever I get guys who are really good at like gaming the bounce off of all of this muscle mass, it'd be like we're just taking that shit out. You're on out here. You're getting into your jerk grip setup, and then we're going to go from there. Gotcha. That seems to be a fan favorite because it's like, why is this so hard? And you're like, well, it sucks. That's why it's hard. You should be jerking this with your legs, but you're not. But yeah, I really do like the close grip and then the pin movements, like he said. But yeah, so those kind of follow. I'm see if Chase agrees with this one, but they very much follow the similar things to like the rack pull, RDL, power clean kind of variations. If I have someone who has like really like long humerus / upper arm and their bench grip is just wide, no matter what they do, I'm going to pull them into a close grip because it's going to be something that's relatively different for them. If I have someone who needs more benching intensity, I'm going to move them to a pin bench. It's going to be the shorter range of motion at the higher intensity. Same thing with the pin thing. It kind of follows that same triage steps. Do you think there's kind of anything in the upper body that violates those same principles from the pulling that we were talking about?
Not really.
Yeah. I think the pin bench is an interesting one. I think it's a little bit harder than like a pin squat or a rack pull for sure. It's just hard to stay tight under it. I think it's technically really demanding.
Yeah, it's more so just getting the positioning down and stuff. And same thing with a pin press is that you can't just walk up to the bar and then just press the thing off the pins. It's getting into the proper positioning, getting your hips underneath the bar, and then making sure that essentially now it's a new equation that your body has to figure out with just balancing it. Because it's starting at a higher range of motion or a shorter range of motion, and it's an overload.
Yeah, entirely new relationship with the pull. And then that's the thing with the pin press, the bar path's still vertical. With the rack pull, the bar path's still vertical. Same thing with the pin squat. With the pin bench, when you're getting under it, the bar path, like if you're viewing from the side of the bench press, it is not a straight up and down line. For most people, it's kind of a J, or it's kind of a big arch, kind of inverted J, maybe just kind of a big arc like this off the top. You kind of have to match that point of both horizontal change in addition to vertical change. So it's like if you are moving the pin bench up 4 inches off your chest, it is also farther back towards your shoulder, right? Because it has to deal with that horizontal displacement. So the pin bench is a really technical one. I only give that to like people who either really need help with their bar path or they're good athletes who can handle it. Definitely one of those two things. I wanted to go back to one of these things real quick and then touch on this. Modifications from prior exercise, Chase. Do you ever get people who come in who have a big base of exercise, and do you ever change the LP for them?
So there's a guy who came in not too long ago who's really progressed his bench, right? He's powerlifter.
Bench bro?
Yeah, kind of. Well, I mean, yes, but I won't really call him that because he's not really that big of a bro, but he has a good established bench already, right? So he's not necessarily going to run a true novice linear progression in the sense that like we're going to add 5 pounds every single time because his bench is at a level right now to where that's too much stress.
What's he benching, and what level of advancement are we talking here?
He's more so on the intermediate side. We're trying to get on the 400 barrier. Right now we did singles at about 335 or so, and the guy weighs like 195, 205, somewhere around there.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so it's just like if you were to ask any random kind of not taxonomically inclined person, is someone benching 335 a novice? Should they be doing novice benching? They'd be like, no.
Yeah.
But what's your plan with him?
So it's increasing the stress and the frequency of the bench, right? So he wants to progress it. So what I have him doing is one day we're doing heavy singles, so we're practicing heavy benches, the bar path there. What I have him doing again is the other day is bench volume. Still doing some overhead presses. You need to do overhead presses if you still don't have a big bench. It helps with keeping the posterior aspect of your shoulder and all the rotator cuff and all that stuff strong. And then, I have him doing pin bench as well. And that's really, I love it because it really humbles you in the aspect of like man, you got to get in the proper position. And, this is not as easy as what you think, because you see the bar and it's like, oh, okay, this is like 5 inches off my chest. But
Yeah.
It really humbles people fast.
Yeah, really like the pin bench. So like one thing that I've noticed is that for at least for men, the bench is going to be the most established thing for them coming in. Even if they've never done the bench press, maybe they'll be like, oh, okay, like, well, I was doing push-ups for military PT for 10 years, whatever it may be. Basically it'll be whichever one of the two pressing movements is the most foreign to them. I will have them run that 2 times a week for maybe the first 3 weeks. Just because it's like technically that's what they'll need to spend the most time on. So if you have someone who's never overhead pressed before, but they've done a lot of horizontal pressing, it'll be like, okay, cool. We'll always do benching on Wednesday, then, and then Monday and Friday we'll run our overhead pressing. And then likewise for people who are just, they've never done the benching. It's kind of like this interesting abstract, like counter meme where people are like, oh, benching is only for bros. I won't bench. I only do dips and overhead press. And you'd be like, no, you should still be benching. Those guys out there exist, especially in like the calisthenics world, martial arts world. A lot of those guys are like that, grapplers especially. But yeah, so we'll be like, okay, we're going to bench 2 times a week. And then we're always going to, press 1 time a week. Those are the only modifications. I very rarely ever modify deadlifts or squats right off the bat. Yeah. Anything like that, Chase, coming in for you?
I don't think I've ever done that yet, unless like someone comes in with an injury or something like that, and that's a different scenario. But if someone's totally fine walking through the doors, no, we're squatting and we're deadlifting basically every single session.
Exactly. Yeah. That was the only thing I was going to say. Was like if someone comes in and they have like an existing back tweak, and they're like, "Hey, I'm part of the reason I'm coming in here is because my back feels like shit." Then it's like, okay, we're not really going to modify, our approach with this. It is going to be more modifying intensity, modifying maybe volume, maybe, modifying range of motion, just taking those kind of preventative steps more so than saying, all right, we just won't squat or we won't deadlift or we're going to increase frequency here or decrease frequency there. And then we all have horror stories from someone who's just like, oh no, I'm just not going to deadlift ever, or I'm not going to squat ever. And you're like, oh, all right, cool. That's totally, we really don't care. You'll do it eventually when you come around to it. We'll just kind of start doing something, and then there's the big one. We saved like 15 minutes for this one. When to end an LP? What the hell's up with that? When do you decide like, okay, I need to 100% change my thinking and stop trying this? Like, I think I've answered the first 3 questions to the best of my ability. It's time to officially move on. But can you just run us through like that? We've mentioned it a few times, both of us, like the first 3 questions. What are those for you?
Yeah. So are you eating enough? Are you sleeping enough? And are you resting enough in between sets?
And
eating
weight
enough,
jumps,
sleeping enough. Oh, yeah, true. Yeah. So if you're, again, like, let's say, you come in, you're gung-ho about this and you just slap on 10 to 15 pounds at a time, that's going to start crashing here pretty damn soon. And you're eating fine, you're sleeping well, you're maximizing your recovery, but again, it's just too much stress to where you can't handle it and recover in that short time period.
Yeah, it's like the doing your homework, basically. Like, are you doing your homework? If yes, and you're still not succeeding, then change your approach. If you're not doing your homework, consider doing that first. Because it's like the weight jump thing. I've seen that a lot. If especially just if you're ever giving casual advice to someone, I've had that a few times where I'll see them do a super grindy, like at 10 out of 10 intensity, few sets. You'll see them the next time. And they're like, oh, what are you doing today? And they're like, oh, I'm just going to go up another 10 pounds. I'm going to try another 10. And you'll be like, you almost died last time. You're going to do another 10 pounds. If you're very optimistic, that may be you. But I find the big one there is like taking too big of a jumps, especially with the overhead press. People think that they can do 10 pounds for way longer than they can. Especially you'll see that if their bench is only 185, their press is like 115, and they're like, oh, I'm going to do 125 and then 35. Perfect. That's not going to work. And then eating and sleeping, like protein needs to be there. I would say a little bit, 1.5 grams per pound of body weight is like a okay marker. What do you tell people that the minimum they should be shooting for is, Chase?
Just a gram per body weight. So ask them their body weight, and then we go from there. And basically, just you can never have too much protein. So if they feel like they're doing enough, I kind of ask them, are you taking whey protein supplements? Are you eating enough meat through your daily intake? And if they're not, kind of just, again, modify it towards like, hey, have half more of a steak or have another scoop in your protein or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Like protein, I don't think people oftentimes realize the importance of that. I'll do that with myself too. Like, oh man, why has my training been so weird this week? And it's like, okay, I've only gotten 100 grams of protein in a day as opposed to the usual 200 or whatever it is. Especially with a recovery, you'll start really noticing it gnawing away with you. With like an intermediate lifter or an advanced lifter, they'll be able to tell, like physically. They'll be like, oh, okay, I feel extra sluggish, or I can feel more soreness than I normally do. I feel more beat up. They'll be able to tell what's wrong, and they'll be able to kind of relate it back to their diet. The leaner you are, I've noticed that becomes more true too. Like if someone is very lean, they'll really be able to tell. They're like, okay, I only had 100 grams of carbs today as opposed to 200. But yeah, so the first three questions, and then going back to it, programming wise, when do you think it's just kind of, when does it ever deserve to be a full switch between novice program to intermediate program? I know we were talking about gradual changes beforehand, but do you think there's ever a time for a big sweeping change?
No, it's a systematic approach to, you change one variable at a time. If it's your squats, the first thing that's causing you to fuck up, you got to realize, okay, is it maybe just a form issue? Am I doing things outside of the gym that is taking away from my squat gains? And if you can answer those to where, no, I'm not doing anything outside of the book, then you need to systematically change it to where it's not just like, hey, I'm going to go to Texas method and then I can't walk the next day because it's too much stress right then and there. We got to have to slowly jump into it. Same thing with the pull and the upper body lifts too.
Yeah, that's honestly a pretty good point. It's like, I don't really think there's ever a deserved time for a sweeping systematic change. Or it's like, if everything is changing at the same time, you can kind of settle on that from a convenience point. You're like, listen, I don't feel like paying attention for the next 6 weeks to grade everything in. I'm just going to do it all at once and then just say, fuck it with the repercussions. I guess that's fine. If you want to, just get a coach and then we'll figure it out for you. So the fuck it approach is always definitely there. But I really don't think there's many times where I can just justify saying, okay, we're going, we're changing all the lists at the exact same time. Things are going to fall at the change at the level that they need to change at. The biggest thing I would say is that you just need to follow your response as a lifter, right? You should understand the principles behind what we're talking about and then follow your individual response or your athlete's response, right? So basically, what you're teasing out in the world of intermediate and advanced training is how much training this person handle on the top end. What's the lowest amount of training this person needs to maintain their strength? How can we use that for a deload week or kind of a recovery, say for a lighter recovery in relationship to their athletic events? Whatever you need to do, you're essentially trying to relate that athlete's experience to what they're doing in the gym and the rest of their life. All of that is following that lifter's response, So there's really never a time where I can just say, okay, we're going from program A to program B. It doesn't really exist. Yep. And then that's the big thing where people will talk about, well, people grind out the end of the LP where it's like, yeah, they're just kind of making bad decisions. They just suck. We can't take responsibility for that.
Yeah.
MJDC in the comments, any modifications on the body weight protein intake ratio for us husky boys? What do you think, Chase?
No, just the only thing that would change, again, this is kind of like a macros question, is just I'd keep the protein usually the same, and just make sure that you're not eating enough, or you're kind of cutting out some fats, or if you're overdoing it on the carbs, watch that too. But mostly I don't change the protein if you're already kind of big.
Yeah. There's really no reason to. If I had to bet MJDC is probably like 230, 240 pounds, let us know in the comments how much you weigh, man. But you can still hit that. Like a gram of protein is only, 4 calories per gram. You can hit, let's say, even if you need 250 grams of protein a day, it's just like, okay, there's 1,000 calories. Or you get cutting on 2,000 calories, then you can have 700 calories worth of carbs and another, fill out the remaining 300 with fat. It's like there's really not an excuse during cutting to start pulling away protein unless you are very deep into like a weight cut for a specific competition, like a grappling competition, let's say, where you're trying to reduce your total body size. Like I need to go from 190 pounds to 160 pounds, or in the situation like where you're like a bodybuilder, and you're incredibly lean already, right? But that's so few people. It's almost never you, the protein intake should always stay higher than you think it needs to. And then you pull back on fats first until things start getting wonky with how little fats you have. And then you pull back on carbs afterwards. But yeah, it'd be interesting. MJDC. Let us know. Let us know how that goes. What other parting thoughts do you have for the thoughts on the LP, analyzing the starting strength and LP? Parting thoughts, parting shots.
Again, it's just make sure that you're considering all variables at hand, even things that are outside of the box, right? So things that are outside of the gym, because a lot of people don't understand that is like, or it's like over the weekend they got busy where it's like they're running around with kids or they had something come up at work, and so where they come into the gym and it's like, oh shit, I only had breakfast today. So that today's session is going to be shit, and we're not going to change it because of what happened today, because this is just a weird occurrence that happens that it's easily fixable the next time, where you just come in and you eat and you get your head out of your ass and you make sure that you're not just eating like 3 eggs for that day.
Yeah, I would say, in short, to sum that, don't let anomalies guide your decision-making process. Yeah. Right. So it's just like, if I am, let's say if you're attempting to do a deadlift and then you just fuck the setup up and you're behind midfoot and you don't get the first rep off the ground, you don't say, well, I'm not strong enough to pull it, I'm never going to try this again, I guess I'll have to come in 3 days later. It's just like, okay, you realize it was a fuck up, take a step back, try it again. If you can be generous with yourself on the technical end of lifting and then be like, okay, I misgrooved that clean, I missed my front catch. It's not that I'm not fast enough or strong enough to do it, I just fucked it up. I can try it again. When it comes to like a programming perspective, you have to realize that it's like, all right, maybe this person's working night shift for this week, in the hospital or whatever it is, or maybe this person, has all these outside conditions, they fucked up their diet or anything like that. Maybe even they change the workout time, so if they normally work out first thing in the morning and then they're working out right before bed and now they're really sleepy, or you flip that condition. Don't let your performance on that workout dictate whether or not you want to end your LP, or whether you want to go to advanced novice, right? The switch to advanced novice, the switch to end an LP is all going to be really slow, but you want to make it based off of the majority of your performances, not anomalies.
I agree.
And also, I think we haven't talked about the chin up much. Thoughts on the chin up during the LP?
For those people that usually have longer lasting LPs, they can usually handle chin ups, fairly early and just after their main workout. So let's say like if it's a kid, I'm probably going to make him do chin ups, as he's waiting for his parents to come pick him up. Yeah, I'm going to make him do chin ups. Yeah, but like if it's someone who comes in and they have a hard time hitting depth on the squat, or you can tell like we already have to get them on a rack pull, those chins, one, they're not going to even be able to do it. And two, like let's say if we had a lat pull machine, like it's going to be too much stress for them. Overall, too much stress on that one workout.
Yeah. So for like the people who are on that more towards that 1 to 2 month end of the spectrum, adding in something like a chin up can be stressful. Like you may not think it's stressful depending on who you are. If you're like, oh, okay, I can do some weighted chins already. Like what is a chin up? It's nothing. It's peanuts. The chin up for a lot of people is really stressful. Plus it's another pain point. It's like you're already having someone who's not used to exercising going through 3 technically challenging things. And then it's like, now do chin ups. And you're like, wait, I can't do any chin ups, and then you have to teach them through the negative process of the bands and all of that. And it can be really stressful. So it's just like the 3 movements, that's kind of the point of efficiency that we like to get to. Chin-ups can come in later for those people. If you can do chin-ups, hit them immediately, basically. People who can do chin-ups wind up doing them. That's a very Supreme Court, I'll know it when I see it type thing. But you know when you see it.
I agree.
But I think that wraps it up for this episode. Thank you all for watching. If you aren't subscribed, definitely please do that. Send this to a friend. Chase, we already did plugs at the beginning, but just to wrap it up, it's Chase Lindley, correct? At Chase Lindley.
That is correct. And then you got to follow that one dude, Chase_Lindley as well.
Yeah. Follow the negative, bizarro version of Chase _Lindley.
Yeah.
The cooler Chase. So we both do online coaching. You can find him at Chase Lindley. You can find me at my website in the description below. We'd both be more than happy to help you out. But I think that should wrap it up for this week. Thank you all for watching.
See you guys.